Say hello. Say hello. Everybody say hello. One,
Say it again.
hello. Like you're doing that.
Oh, hello.
Marquez.
All right, so that's terrible. I know he needs no introduction, and truth be told, I'm going to introduce him anyways. He is a member of our community. He is a member of the Lake Worth Interfaith Network. I think he's one of the founding members of that group. We have been working together for many years, and even this weekend have done wonderful things together. His wife, Chris, is the backbone of all of his wisdom and insights. So I can't introduce Ted without giving Chris the credit that she is due. So Chris, mwah, we love you. Ted holds a master's degree in biblical Hebrew from the University of Wisconsin, Madison, and he currently serves as on the spiritual assembly of the Baha'i Baha'i of Lake Worth, and he teaches courses on Judaism, Christianity, Interfaith Dialogue at the Wilmette Institute. He's also the compiler of the Interfaith Prayer Book, which was really a prayer book that we relied upon during COVID. And I think it might be nice, Ted, for you to start reading a passage from that prayer book on Friday nights in Delray, because I know it's a schlep for you to come out to Davie, but if you come out to Davie, we'll do it there too. And he's also the author of the Kinship of the Bible and the Quran. Please put your hearts together for my sweet friend, my beautiful brother, our amazing scholar in residence, Ted Brownstein.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It's always a pleasure to be together and see. I have the gallery view on. I see as many faces as I can see now, and it's really great to be together again. This last week we had quite a full week. As Rabbi was talking about last Shabbos, Sheikh Ghassan Manasra was with us in Davie, and he spoke about his work in the Holy Land with Abrahamic Reunion as a bridge builder and a peacemaker. He's an Israeli citizen, comes from Nazareth in Israel, but Palestinian background, and a scholar and a Sufi sheikh, and has a very rich background there in bringing people together and trying to counteract the forces of division that are feeding the conflict. And then he was with us on Wednesday night. I know many of you were there for wisdom class, and he talked further about his work, and we shared a video from a great Palestinian peacemaker, Elias Jabor, who is also an Israeli who was a young teenager at the time of the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, and lived through the whole thing. And again, an individual that really has dedicated himself to peacemaking. And one of the things that Elias said was, I'm going to close this door so I don't hear the other video, was that the land of Israel, Palestine, is a small country, but there's plenty of room there for all the Jews and all the Arabs, if there just was the will to live together and to share the land. And he was a very hopeful, upbeat and inspiring speaker. And we played a short video of his, had a discussion on Wednesday night, which was great. But one topic that was mentioned really briefly that I thought could use some elaboration, and that I want to spend just a few minutes on tonight, is how do we share our holy sites, and particularly the Temple Mount and the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock have kind of been a flashpoint. They've been a cause of a lot of stress and feeding anxiety in the conflict. And how do we go about sharing that? How do we go about respecting each other's historical heritage with that holy ground? And so I'd like to talk a little bit about, maybe give a timeline of Jewish attachment to the Temple Mount, how it got to be what it is today. Much of this might be well known to you. Just by a show of hands, friends, so I kind of know where we're going. If we talk about the first temple and the second temple and the Temple Mount, how many of you are familiar with what we're talking about? Okay, most of us. Okay, great. So I apologize if some of this is review, but starting in the beginning, in Midrash and whatever, the capstone, the stone at the top of Mount Moriah, which is where the Temple Mount is located, there's a rock. It's called the foundation stone in Midrash, and it's said that creation emanated from that spot, that Adam was created there. On that same spot, on Mount Moriah, it's said that Abraham bound and intended to sacrifice his son Isaac, according to the Muslims, Ishmael, but that same spot at the head, on the peak, on the summit of Mount Moriah, was viewed as that holy spot. Later, King David determined to establish a permanent home for the tabernacle, for the tent of meeting, that Moses had been instructed to build with Aaron in the desert. That was a portable tent, had a sanctuary inside of it made of curtains rather than hard stone walls, and had a holy compartment and a most holy where the Ark of the Covenant was, with the Shekinah light that represented the presence of God, that the high priest only could go into one day a year on Yom Kippur, otherwise it was sanctified as the inaccessible throne of God. Then there were some priestly areas where the priests had the menorah lampstand, a table of bread, and an incense stand where they officiated and kept light burning, and all this had symbolic and ritual meaning, as well as sacrifices, animal sacrifices that took place in the courtyard. So anyway, David took this structure that Moses had been instructed to build in the desert and bought a piece of land north of the city of Jerusalem at that time, and determined to build a permanent temple there. How many of you have been to Israel and you know what I'm talking about, where the city of David is, which is south of the Temple Mount? And then later the city moved north, so now that area is included in the city. In David's time, it was kind of on the outskirts. But then David was told by the prophets that he was a man of blood and could not build a temple. So he gathered the wood, the cedars of Lebanon, other materials, but it was left to his son Solomon, whose name means peace, to actually build a temple. So that's why we refer to the first temple as Solomon's temple, right? Okay. And then Solomon dedicated that temple with an amazing prayer. And I'm going to read just parts of it because it shows again the importance that this played as the point to which people would turn and pray facing Jerusalem. So Solomon says, "But will God really dwell on earth? The heaven, even the heaven of the heavens, cannot contain you, how much less this temple that I have built. Yet give attention to your servant's prayer and his plea for mercy. Lord my God, hear the cry, the prayer that your servant is praying in your presence. May your eyes be open toward this temple day and night, this place where you said, my name shall be here, so that you will hear the prayer of your servants who prayed toward this place. Hear the supplication of your servant and your people Israel when they pray toward this place. Hear from heaven, your dwelling place. When you hear, forgive." So we call it the Mishkan, right? We call it Bet HaMikdash, which means a holy place. It is the holy place. So the temple existed from Solomon's day through the days of the kings for several hundred years. And then it was destroyed by the Babylonians in the 6th century BCE. And the Babylonians destroyed the temple, took the leaders, most of the people, into exile in Babylon. And the site of the temple lay dormant then for a period of 70 years. In the course of events, the Persians conquered Babylon, and the Persians were Zoroastrians. They were very liberal, if you will, in allowing their conquered peoples to practice their own religion. And they told the Jews they could go back to their homeland and rebuild the temple. So Ezra led the people back, and the second temple then was built, just a generation after the destruction of the first temple. And that temple continued to exist again for hundreds of years. We all know the story of the Maccabees, and the Greeks came and they desecrated the temple, and Maccabees, won a victory, won their independence from the Greek Empire, and rededicated the temple. That's what we celebrate in Hanukkah, is the rededication of the temple. And then that kingdom of the Maccabees existed for about 100 years. The temple continued to function with the priests and the sacrifices and everything that was according to Torah. And then the Romans came and included Israel in the Roman Empire. They took over, and they ruled for over 100 years there. And they did a huge building project. I'm going to excuse that. Oops. Okay. And what they did, what they did was they built a casement wall to enlarge the courtyards of the temple and created a large flat spot. And so then the temple was built, rebuilt and enlarged with different courtyards for the Gentiles and the women and other things that were not in the original Mosaic plan. And Herod's wall is what still exists today. The Western Wall, where the Kotel is, that's not actually a wall of the temple, but that's part of this casement wall that was built around the peak of Mount Moriah, and then filled with earth and created this courtyard where then the temple was built. So during there was a rebellion of the Jews for independence from the Roman Empire in the year 66, and there were 5 years approximately of independence. Eventually the Romans came, reconquered the land, destroyed the temple, and threw blocks off the wall that are still there and so forth. And that was the destruction of the second temple in 70 of the Common Era. And so then there were continued efforts of the Jewish people to liberate themselves under Bar Kokhba, an attempt to rebuild the temple. And as you know, those failed, and eventually the Jews, were scattered further into the diaspora, and the population in the Holy Land dwindled. Interestingly, there was one attempt in Roman times. As you know, Rome became Christianized in the 4th century under Constantine, and then, of course, the Romans had to give up their pagan gods and their traditional ways of worship. Not everybody was too happy with that. And there was an emperor by the name of Julian who wanted to restore pagan Rome to its glory and restore the pagan gods about 50 years after Constantine. And he wanted to reestablish the Jewish temple with its rights, because it was kind of viewed as an anti-Christian move, to reestablish the temple that had been destroyed. So some attempt was made at that time, but that didn't last very long. And the Temple Mount then was left derelict then for hundreds of years at that point in time. The Christians in that day looked at the temple and its destruction and desolation as a sign of Christian victory over Judaism, that they had been successful and God was blessing them, and the Jews were in a poor state. So they turned the Temple Mount into a garbage dump. Well, come the advent of Islam in the 5th and 6th and 7th centuries, and eventually the Muslim armies came and conquered the Holy Land and took it back from the Byzantines. And they discovered the holy sites were in disarray like that, and they actually cleaned them up in succeeding generations, built the Dome of the Rock there, built Al-Aqsa Mosque in the 6th and early 7th century, and restored the Temple Mount to a holy place. So that gives you a quick overview of the history there as it applied to the Jewish people in the beginning of the Muslim era. But just to show how holy this site is in Judaism, again, this is a Midrash, and it says, the land of Israel is in the middle of the earth, Jerusalem is in the middle of Israel, the temple is in the middle of Jerusalem, the Holy of Holies, the main sanctuary, is in the midst of the temple, the Holy Ark is in the midst of the Holy of Holies, and the foundation stone, this rock, which had been the peak of Mount Moriah, was in front of the Holy of Holies. So it's a holy site, and all of this, history makes it holy to us. It's the most holy site in traditional Judaism. So the Muslims also accepted the teachings of the Torah. They accepted these histories. The same prophets that are in our book are in their book, and they view the land of Israel as the land of the prophets. And so then they too have a strong sacred connection to these holy sites. They chose to build the Dome of the Rock. They're covering the rock because of an account in the Quran called the Night Journey. I'm just curious, again, how many people are familiar with the Night Journey in the Quran? Okay, great. So Muhammad had a vision, or some say he traveled bodily, but in one night while he was asleep in his bed, he had a vision that he rode a giant winged steed from Mecca in Arabia in one night to Jerusalem. And why did he go to Jerusalem? Because Jerusalem was viewed as the sacred portal with access to heaven. So in order for Muhammad, in this vision, to go to heaven, he had to travel through Jerusalem. And so the account goes that he rode this steed called Barak, and when he was in Jerusalem in the spiritual plane, he met Abraham and David and Solomon and the other prophets in our history that had lived there and worked there, and they all prayed together. And then Muhammad, in his vision, ascended to heaven, so I had a view of the throne of God and so forth. And then he returned to Mecca. So this vision is why that the Dome of the Rock was built on that rock, because that was the place that Muhammad used as this kind of entryway, the sacred place to get to heaven. Another interesting Muslim connection, one last thing that I'll mention, is that I think everybody knows that Muslims face Mecca when they pray. They call it the Qibla, and wherever they are in the earth, they find the direction to Mecca, and they do their 5 times daily prayer facing Mecca. But Mecca was not the original Qibla. Jerusalem was in Muslim practice. And for the first period in Muslim history, they faced Jerusalem. And, many of us, I've heard, Jewish people say, well, Muslims don't really have any connection to Jerusalem. The name Jerusalem isn't even mentioned in their book. But yes, it's referred to, and it's called the Qibla of the people of the book. So just as we read in Solomon's prayer that all the people should turn and pray to the temple, that was the Qibla in Jewish traditional use. That was the direction of prayer. And that's what Muhammad refers to as the original Qibla in Islam. Later, again, it was transferred to Mecca, and there's a whole history there of the Kaaba, the Black Cube, and that sacred spot that goes back to antiquity that Muslims believe was built by Abraham and Ishmael, way back in ancient times, in patriarchal times. So the point here is that we have two people that have deep, abiding, and sacred feelings for this piece of land. And it doesn't serve the cause of peace any interest for any one people to claim the exclusive right to this land or want to be the only ones that are there. We have to find a way to share it and to respect the other. Now, the way things are working now, the Muslims basically have the top of the Temple Mount, and Jews have the Kotel and have the Western Wall as the sacred spot. But every once in a while, there's some stirrings about Jews going up to the Temple Mount, and sometimes politicians stir things up, and it has been a flashpoint. And there's nothing that will make the Muslim world boil into turmoil like intruding on their space, especially if they think that the intent is to tear down the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque and to put a temple in its place. And I don't know why anybody hasn't suggested this, but if you've been there, you know the big expanse that there is in the Temple Mount, and that the north end is not particularly occupied. So wouldn't that be a great spot if we want to build a third temple, to build it next to Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome, and to share the space, and then it could become a true expression of interfaith and brotherhood and collaboration instead of being a flashpoint for controversy. May it be God's will. And so thank you for your attention. I hope this was informative for everybody, and may we find a path to peace together.
Thank you, beautiful brother. Not only was that a brief trip down memory lane, but it was also a glimpse into a prophetic vision of the future. And I appreciate your nevuah, your prophecy, and I appreciate your openness and your hope, your faith, as we say, Inshallah. Yezras Hashem.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Oh, Shabbat Shalom to you. Thank you, Tim.